Have you ever been lost? I mean, like really lost? Like your heart's pounding and you think that world is going to end? You ever felt that way? I was just a little kid, have no clue how old I was. I still remember, probably 4 or 5, because I kind of remember some of it. I just remember we were at a convention and I lost my parents. I don't think my parents lost me. I don't think they even knew I was gone. But I panicked. You know that feeling? I mean, I started thinking like, where am I going to live? Who's going to adopt me? How am I going to eat? All in a matter of about 10 seconds, you know? And finally, I heard my dad laughing. And my dad's laugh was just, he had like a huge laugh. And so I heard him, and I ran to him, and I found him, and my mom's like, where were you? You know, she realized at that point that I had been lost. But I was lost, but they hadn't lost me. Sometimes we get lost in life, don't we? You know, last week we talked about how sometimes even churches get lost. Even Jesus followers sometimes get lost. And we forget what this is all about. In the midst of doing things for God, in the midst of learning things about God, we can get lost, and it doesn't take long to get lost. If you get lost just for a moment, a season in a church life, you can go in a different direction. And projects and ministries and all kinds of things can get planned, and you scratch your head about a year in and say, where did we go off? That happens in individual lives. Maybe you really are walking with Christ, and all of a sudden you find yourself just completely off base. And you say, wow, I'm so far away from the Father that I love. For some of you here today, as I describe being lost, you've never given your life to Christ at all. In biblical terms, that actually is lost. Jesus said that I came to seek and save those that are lost. He would actually leave 99 of those that were in his family, and he would go and he would find the one that was lost. I bet you there's some people like this in the room where you're in a room full of people that are believers, and you're always thinking about the person that doesn't know Jesus. You may even be thinking about somebody today that you invited that they're not here, and you're like, man, I would love for them to be a part of a Christian family. I would love for them to understand what does it mean to be on track with Christ. We all find ourselves lost. Whether it's a Christian or a non-Christian, we sometimes get lost. And last week, what I wanted to do is paint a bullseye for you about the Christian life, the life of a Jesus follower. Last week, we began a series that is foundational to who we are as a church. More than that, it's foundational to who we are as believers. We'll do this about every 6 weeks. Every year we'll do it, and we'll do it for 6 weeks because it's so important that we continue to stay on track and not get lost. So if you missed last week, that happens sometimes. We actually created a YouTube channel, Aspire Tucson. You can go on there, and you can find these messages that you've missed. You can also go on our website. In a few days, it'll be up on our website. But the YouTube is the quickest way to do that at Aspire Tucson, and you can follow along. We even have last week's notes that you can get on the offering table. You can take those, and you can follow along with us. And to help you, because it's so important, we've created a 40-day journal that you can get today. And it goes through what does it mean to be a Jesus follower. And that'll be at the Next Steps table. So it's a $15 price, but if you don't have the money, just make a donation. Give what you can, okay? And so it's a $15 suggested donation. You can grab those, and you can walk through it. I've seen this devotion change thousands of people. We actually had a church in Ghana that started going through this. And nobody told them that it was a 40-day. They did it for 40 weeks. So for one day, they would spend it for the whole week. And after just a few years, couple of years, they had started multiple churches. 7, 8 churches started out of the life of a Jesus follower. So no telling what God can do in your life if you walk along and spend time with him. And I must say this, it does not replace the Bible. It's not a second book, okay? The Bible is the Bible. And what this journal does is it kind of helps you walk through it, and it refers to scriptures as you go, all right? So as we go, it'll have 3 different relationships that are the bullseye. Because the bullseye for us, and you can write this down, the life of a Jesus follower, it's all about relationships. If you were to look at the New Testament and look at Jesus' life, he only was about 3 different relationships. A relationship with the Father, which is abide. A relationship with his family, which is connect. That's the word we use. And a relationship with the world, those that did not know Jesus, and that's share. Abide, connect, share. And I asked you last week, what does it look like to live the life of a Jesus follower? And really, if you boil it down, to live the life of a Jesus follower, if I looked at your life and I saw that you were following Jesus, your life would be about those 3 things. I could peel back your life and look at it. We could peer in, and I'm not going to do that. That's kind of weird, right? But if we looked at your life, we filmed every single moment of every day of your life, your 3 relationships would be those 3, and that's what your life would look like. And you would be fully committed to those relationships. And today, I'm going to make a bullseye on the 3. You'd ask me, what's the most important one? It's this, a relationship with the Father. Not that the other 2 are unimportant, but if you spend time with the Father, this is what will happen. That relationship will overflow into a relationship with his family. The Father's not going to keep you separate from his family. Matter of fact, he wants us to be one. And that relationship will overflow into a relationship with those that don't know Jesus at all. And so spending time with the Father is crucial. That's how we live our life. The first half of my life, I explained this last week, I really thought the Christian life was about doing things for God and knowing a lot of information about God. And so I did a lot of things for God. And after going to seminary and getting my degrees, and if you want to see my degrees, they're in a box somewhere. But I'm not one of those guys that puts it on the wall. If you are, that's fine. Occasionally, I'll kind of dust it off and put it up on the wall. Not to impress, because it's just my family. They didn't know I went to seminary. Just to kind of put it up there, make sure that, I remind myself, okay, I did go to school. Okay, that's good. Now I put it back. It's not about knowing a bunch of stuff. I took Greek. I took Hebrew. Don't ask me how much of that I remembered. It's all Greek to me, right? I don't remember a whole lot, but I do know enough of the tools to understand how to read Scripture. But knowing things about God, I can get PhD upon PhD, I can get doctorates of ministry, I can get all kinds of stuff, do a lot of things, and still miss the bullseye. Jesus says that at the end of his life. He said, there's all these people that are going to come to me and say, I did this in your name, I did that in your name, and it's quite a list, by the way. And he said, depart from me, I never even knew you. It's about knowing God. It's about having a relationship with God. The primary call on my life is not to do something for Jesus. The primary call on my life is to be with Jesus. It doesn't mean that being with him, he's not going to tell you to do things. He will. But the primary call is to be with Jesus. That's a big difference. If you miss that, you actually don't even just miss the entire series. You miss the entire point of life. That's a biggie. It's the bullseye of these 3. John 17:3 says this, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. At age 28, I really began to understand that Jesus didn't want me to do things necessarily for him. He wanted me to be with him. I had some men that taught me about this. They would spend time with me. They'd hang out with me. They'd ask me about what Jesus was saying to me. And I was like, I don't know what Jesus was saying to me. I don't know. I had one friend, Barry. He said, hey, let's just go spend some time and hang out on the beach. I said, well, what day of the week do you want to do it? He goes, let's do it every day. What time do you want to do that? Well, my day's pretty busy. Let's get up early. So we got up early. 5:30 in the morning, walking the beaches of Naples. I missed some sleep, but it's a beautiful beach at 5:30 in the morning. And we sit there and we watch the sun come up and we spend time with God. It took men in my life to teach me how to do this, but ultimately it wasn't about men teaching me. It wasn't about men discipling me. It was about Jesus. And they were helping me see that it's about spending time with God. That is the whole point of life. Maybe you've heard this quote before. I want to quote it. It's from one of my favorite authors, Henry Blackaby. He said this about Christians: we are so actively oriented that we assume we are saved for a task to perform rather than a relationship to enjoy. And I think it's on your guide that you have. We are so actively oriented that we assume we are saved for a task to perform rather than a relationship to enjoy. Jesus is truth. We learned that in John 8:32. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. People quote that all the time. They have no clue what they're talking about. Talking about Jesus. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It's not just truth. It's Jesus. Jesus will set you free. And so you got to spend time with the truth. Your life is going to tell you a lot of lies on a daily basis. Parents, your kids are going to go to school and hear a lot of lies. Their friends are going to tell them a lot of lies. Unfortunately, sometimes the teachers will tell them some lies in junior high and high school. And if they don't get it there, they're going to go to college and hear a whole bunch of it. And you get billed for it. We have two through it. Even Christian schools, they would sometimes have questions about what they learned. And we'd have to talk to them about truth. But we would always take them back to the Bible, and we would talk about Jesus. The truth will set you free. So it's important as Christians, Zach and Sarah, as you raise James, teach your children, teach yourselves, teach your family to spend time with God. Because the big picture goal of life, and this is free, by the way, okay? This is the big picture goal. This is extra. I'm not going to charge you for this. This is the goal of life. Please come back next week, okay? Don't say, well, he told me the goal of life. What's better than that, right? Here's the big picture goal, and you can write it down. Know God. That's it. Know God. You don't even have to be a Christian to understand that. The philosophers of the world have boiled it down to that. Know God. How do you know God? You have to have a relationship with His Son, because the only way to God is through Jesus Christ. So to know God is to know truth. To know God is to know the way. To know God is really to know life. Now this is also free, okay? The daily goal for you. If the life goal is to know God, here's your daily goal. The daily goal is to spend time with God. Makes sense, right? Because how do you know somebody? You spend time with them. The word know is not I know information about God. Know is intimacy. It's knowing God. It's actually spending time with Him. Just like you spend time with people that you love. He wants to spend time with you. That blows me away that the God of the universe is waiting for me every morning to spend time with Him. He's waiting for you to spend time with Him. Some of you have already emailed me and told me stories about how your life was changed this week because for the first time you began spending time with God. You're like, wow, my wife and I have done it together. We've never done that before, and it has changed our lives and it's changed our marriage. And I'm thinking, in 4 days? That's pretty good. The goal of life is to know God. Your daily goal is to spend time with God. So if you miss that time with God, good luck on your day. Because at the end of the day, have you ever spent the whole day and you're like, well, that was a waste. That was really hard. I'm not saying if you spend time with God, it won't be hard. I'm just telling you that spending time with God will launch your day into a focus that will actually allow God to live His life through you rather than you trying to live it on your own. Now, I've been saying this over and over to some of you for a few years now, but some of you it's beginning to click with you. It's beginning to click with you. But I want to boil it down even further today before we move any further. Because for some, not all, but for some, it still isn't clicking. And I just want to show you the priority. Why prioritize your time with God? So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Would it be true to say that you really don't want to sin? You don't want to miss the mark. Sin is missing the mark, right? It's missing the mark. It's But it's more than that. Missing the mark means that you're missing the life that God has for you. So I want to help you know how spending time with God actually connects with hitting the mark of Christ and the abundant life he has for you. So don't answer out loud. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Don't answer out loud. Does a Christian want to sin? Does a Christian want to sin? In your old life, the life you had, maybe you accepted Christ last week. I'm talking about the old life like 2 weeks ago. For some of you that have been a Christian for 20 years, the old life before you accepted Christ, that old life, no doubt about it, that inner person wants to do things opposite of what God wants. But when I do sin, if you're really a child of God, when you do sin, it convicts you. You're convicted and you say, I don't want to do that. I don't believe that's in right standing with God. I don't want to do, that's not his way. And you're convicted of that. I don't want to do it. I realize that after doing that I disobeyed God. It's not what I want at all. I want to please God. I want his character for my life. Every follower of Jesus Christ wants to experience the full and abundant life. Would you agree? I believe that. So the answer to this first question would be no. A Christian doesn't want to sin. Second question, does a Christian have to sin? Does a Christian have to sin? Some of you are thinking a little bit more about that one, right? If you're like me, you're thinking, well, I do it a lot. Do I have to? Do I have to sin? I think always the best place on these tough questions is go right to the Bible. Romans 6 and 7 says this. Knowing this, that our old self was crucified with him, that's Jesus, in order that our body of sin might be done away with, so that we would no longer be slaves to sin, for he who has died is freed from sin. Galatians 2:20, some of you are saying, well, Jesus died. I didn't die with him. Actually, you died with him. Jesus died on the cross, and so did your old life. Galatians 2:20 says, I crucified with Christ, therefore I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. So does a Christian have to sin? There is a reality in this that no, we don't have to sin because Jesus is truth, and he will set us free from this sin. We may drift to sin. We may even sin, but we don't have to. 2 Peter 1:3 says this, seeing that his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the true knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. You have supernaturally been given everything you need to live a victorious life. Everything. Wouldn't it be cool if next year you could look back in your life and go, no, the goal's not sinning. The goal is Jesus. But wouldn't it be cool to look back and say, I'm not dealing with the same junk that I was dealing with in 2019. I put that behind me. I was crucified with Christ, and now I'm finally realizing that in my head, and I'm beginning to live that out in my life, that victory that I have. Everything necessary to live a godly life. So the answer to this second question is no. Does a Christian have to sin? No. Here's another question. If we don't have to sin, and we don't want to sin, why do we sin? If we don't have to and we don't want to, why do we? One of my mentors, Dudley Hall, helped me with this, understand this. Just a few years ago, I was at a father-son retreat, and he was talking, and his words just spoke to me. And he talked about living loved. He talked about this life that God loved me no matter what. Now, I knew that. I knew that my whole life. But for whatever reason, when he was speaking to it, man, I felt God just say, I love you. And I love those moments. For those of you remember, I told you about one time, and when I was 26, I was in a Del Taco line, of all places, and God told me he loved me. I wish it was a mountain or a burning bush. It was Del Taco. I don't know why he picked Del Taco, but it happened in Del Taco. But here at this mountain experience, Dudley was speaking, and I just sensed God say, man, I love you. But also Dudley said this, out of that love relationship, it's a relationship, which means you need to love God. It's not just God loving you. You love God. Could you imagine if in a dating relationship, you just said, this is how it's going to play out. I'm going to love you, but you're not going to love me. That's not going to work. Or, I know I'm going to love you, but you don't have to love me. That's not going to work either. For whatever reason, though, God allows us to go on sometimes without showing him love, and he shows us his love, and that's called unconditional agape love. But to really understand life and to experience him, there needs to be a reciprocal love. God loves you, and you love him. How do you know if somebody loves you? What's the evidence of it? Time. What if today you're with your wife, you're with your mom, and you don't spend any time with her? You know what your mom's going to feel? They don't love me. So what'd you do? Some of you today got dressed up. I put my jacket on. She's not even here. I'm going to call her up later. I'm going to spend some time with her. I'm going to talk to her. I love my mom. We spend time with the people we love, and you need to spend time with God. And this passage in John 14:15 says this. This is a big one. If you love me, you'd keep my commandments. Wow. Most of my life when I heard this, I heard it this way. If you love me, you'd better obey me. That's how I heard it. I bet you some of you read it that way too. If you love me, you do this, do. That's not how I read it anymore. The pursuit and focus is on love in this passage, not on obedience. It's important to obey, but my focus in life cannot be just obey. It has to be out of a love relationship with God. So I spend time with God, and what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. If you love me, you'll obey. You'll do the things I want you to do. Parents, you know how this goes with your kids. You're never saying, okay, if they don't obey, I don't love them, right? God's always going to love you. But you want your kids to reciprocate and say, I want you to do the things that I tell you to do. And you love me, don't you? Do what's best for you. I know what's best for you. I want you to walk this out. And this is Jesus saying, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. Listen what Clyde Cranthper said in this quote. Our obedience to Christ is in direct proportion to our love for Christ. Let that sink in. Our obedience to Christ is in direct proportion to our love for Christ. So as I was spending time with Dudley Hall and reflected on this love relationship, and you look at this passage, here's the only conclusion that you can draw. And just hang on, okay? Don't leave when I say this. I just want you to hear it out. Do you know why you're struggling with obedience? You don't love God. That's what I had to come to conclusion with. I didn't love God. I needed to walk that out and love him more. And you say, well, I loved him here. Love isn't here. Love is doing it. Have you ever had somebody tell you that they loved you and they never ever showed it? You didn't show me. You say it. I've said I loved God. But you see, the love relationship goes towards obedience. It flows out of this love relationship, this obedience. My grandma Hook lived to be 98 years old, almost made it to 100. Godly woman. Most of her life, she was a widow. Her husband, my grandpa Hook, had polio, and he died early on in life. And I had one son, my dad, and he was an only child. And she worked at a hotel in Chandler, making money. Actually, sometimes had 2-3 jobs. Worked at the flower shop in Chandler. Worked at the hotel there in downtown Chandler. And really helped my dad to go to college and to continue on and eventually go to seminary. And I love my grandma. Every time I visited my grandma, she would either be doing something for somebody or reading her Bible. This is her Bible here. I got 3 more at home that she owned. This is the one, the red one. I love this one. This one's marked up with some really, really cool passages, and I love my grandma. And I don't ever remember my grandma ever doing anything wrong. I spent a lot of time around her. Did she sin? We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. But she may be one of those people that sinned once. I mean, her relationship with God was in direct relationship to her obedience with God. She would obey, not because she was a good obeyer. She obeyed because she was in a love relationship with God, and she had Bibles that were marked up with her relationship with God. And she'd spend early times in the morning and late at night. And let me tell you, if your husband is near death and has polio, and you've got a son, and you got 2 or 3 jobs, some people will say, I don't have time to spend with God. She had to spend time with God because of her schedule. She had to, because she wouldn't have made it. For those of you that are single moms, you know how it is. You've got to hold on to that relationship with God. You've got to get up early in the morning because that's your only, really, at the end of the day, sometimes you just say, that's the only life I had today. Everything else zaps me. Everything else sucks the life out of me. But my relationship with God is what fuels me. My grandma Hook understood this. When I love God, the other life has to stop. When I love God, the other Brian has to go away. I have to allow Jesus to flow in my life. So this following diagram illustrates a priority of spending time with God. It starts out with sin. Why do we sin? Why do we miss the mark with God? Why do we constantly do our own thing? We've already said it. We don't love God. We don't love God because we don't know God. Knowing God is not knowing here. It's spending time with Him. If you spend time with God, that love relationship would flourish. We don't know God. The more that I spend time with God, the more I realize that He knew me and loved me first, and that love draws me to Him. The more I grow in this life, the more I grow to love the Father. The Father invites me to know Him. Why don't we know God? We don't spend time with God. We don't spend time with Him. How in the world are you going to get to know somebody if you don't spend time with them? We have to spend time with each other. Why do I know my wife now? We celebrate 20 years next month. 20 years. 20 years married together. How do I know her? We've spent time together. The more I know her, the more I love her. We've been through some incredible things together. But the more that I know her, the more I love her. Even the hard times have allowed us to love each other more because we look back and we say, we got each other. Have you ever felt that with your spouse? You're like, wow, one minute, we're just struggling and fighting, and the next minute you're just like, I love him so much. Why? Because you spent time together. You've sacrificed for each other. You've helped one another. You've raised kids together. You've moved together. I love her because I spend time with her. What if I told her, as a fiance, June 9th of 1999. Now, we're getting married in a couple of days, but I want to tell you, this is how it's going to play out. I'm going to give you 1 hour a week, tops. And when we're together, I'm going to gather some of my friends together too. We're going to hang out, we're going to sing songs about you, and we're going to do that. It'll be like a big celebration for you, and then I won't see it for the next week. And we'll do it all again if something else doesn't come up. If something comes up, you hold off for a week. I'll be back. That's how we do with God. Say, God, I'm going to give you an hour a week. By the way, it's not going to be by ourselves. There's going to be a bunch of other people, and there are other people leading, and somebody's going to preach and all that, and I may talk to you at some point during the hour. But our relationship with God got to be more than that. You can't tell me you love God if you don't spend time with God. And if you don't love God, there's not transformation in your life, and it can't change you. It has to be more than that. By the way, I don't think my wife would have married me if I said that. I think she would have said, time out. I know 2 days is coming, but we probably need to hold off. I'd like a little more than an hour a week. We've got to spend more than just 1 hour. How many of you would say that spending time with God's a good thing? You don't have to answer out loud. Would you say it's a good thing to spend time with God? How many of you would say spending time with God would change your life if you spend time with Him? How many of you would say that spending time with God is an absolute necessity to live this life out? I hope you'd answer positively on all those. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do, you fill it in, nothing. If Jesus said, I don't do anything unless the Father tells me, how much more should we spend time with Him? Jesus said, I'm not doing anything without that relationship. So here's a cycle that I believe that we need in our life. I think sometimes what happens is we begin an approach where we just don't see the need. So that's the next one. We don't see the need. And you know why we don't see the need? The last one here. It's pride. Pride says this: God, I don't need you. God, I don't need you. It's actually, the image in the Greek is like a stiff arm, pride. Some of you don't know what stiff arm is. Some of you that saw Derrick Henry last year, stiff arm all the way to the end zone for like 100 yards, know what a stiff arm is. A stiff arm is saying, I oppose you. God says, I oppose the proud, but I give grace to the humble. I don't want to oppose God. You know, when we live this lifestyle, what we're saying is, God, I don't need you. And what happens is this cycle begins. God opposes the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. So here's the cycle that I think we need in our life. It starts with humility. This says, God, I need you. But God gives grace to those that are humble. God gives grace. Grace is the empowering presence for the moment. And I don't know what moment you need, but He'll give you grace. For some of you this week, it's grace just to live another day. Some of you, it's a grace just to go to work. One more day at work. For others of you, it's, I need one more day to be the single mom that I need to be. I can't do it, God. That's a great place to be, because humility says, I can't do it. That's a great place to start. And God gives you grace. God gives you grace. And you know what happens when you get grace? We begin to move forward and we see the need. We see that, God, we need you. And we spend time with you because we need you. We can't help but do it. Like my grandma that needed God, that time with God. And when you spend time with God, what happens is you begin to know God. The more I spend time with anybody, the more that I know Him. When you know Him, you know what happens? You hear His voice. You begin to hear His voice. Some of you have asked me, what does God's voice sound like? You won't know until you spend some time with Him. But when you begin to hear His voice, you know what? You begin to hear other voices too and say, that's not God. That's not God. How do you know if it's Satan or God? You'll know the difference if you spend time with God. You got to spend time with God. Satan will try to deceive you into a lot of different lies. And when you hear God's voice, it doesn't matter what any other voice says, you're going to move forward because God said it. And you move forward in that. We know what He says about me. We know that what truth sounds like. We know what the acceptance feels like. Middle schoolers that are here, your friends are going to tell you all kinds of things in the course of a day, but if you hear from God, that's all that matters. When God says, I love you, it doesn't matter what everybody else is saying. You know, nowadays they don't just say it to you at school too. They say it on Instagram. They see it on tweets. They say it by texting you. And you know what? That doesn't matter because you hear from God. If you're struggling with what people are saying at school, run to God. Spend time with God and allow Him to say the things that you really are. We know that you may not hear anything positive from anybody else, but God has something to say to you. And you know what happens when you spend time with God? What happens is you love God. We know God and we love God. I don't know if you've ever loved God or not, but it is something that you need. It's something that'll transform your life. Not just that He loves you, but that you love Him. You say, God, I love you more than anything. I don't want to do anything apart from you. I want to follow you, God. And what happens when that happens is it is easy to obey somebody that you know loves you and you love him. See, obedience comes out of that love relationship. And God is going to tell you, some of you that are moving forward, and I love to see 7th, 8th, 9th graders here. Some of you, you're going to grow up in this church, and God's going to call you to do incredible things, and even your family might sometimes say, I don't know if you should do that, but you say, you know what, God told me to do it. And you move forward in that, and that's all that matters. God will take you, make some of you missionaries. Others of you will be pastors like me. Oh my goodness, if you think you can be a pastor and start a church without hearing from God, you got another thing coming. Because every single day you're saying, God, I'm doing this. Why? Because I told you to. Oh, that's right, and I love you, and you love me. And you move forward in that relationship. It's a love relationship. Yes, I sin less than I once did. But more importantly, I love more. It's not about sin more or sin less. It's about love. I love. It allows you to enjoy Jesus. One of my mom's favorite songs is, Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. You ever hear that one? I love that chorus. You just sing it with me if you know it. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I've proved him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Oh, for grace to trust him more. Takes his grace, takes his empowering presence in your life to trust him more. If you love me, you'll obey my commandments. I want to end today by looking at 2 different cycles. We're going to go through it real quick. You can take your notes and just jot this down. Based upon what we just talked about, I don't want you to leave here without really getting this down. The first is this. The first one is based on life without spending time with Jesus. I'm going to do it. You're going to walk out of here and you're going to live that kind of life, that Christian life. Man, you give your life to Christ and you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do some good things for you, God. I'm going to change my life. Second, this is what it goes to. Temporary success. You actually will be successful at doing it for a short time. You can do anything just really for a short time, can't you? You're like, I'm going to do it. Great. And it looks kind of like Christian. It's awesome. And then it leads to this. Failure. You know what happens when you fail? It's like, oh man, I tried that Christian stuff. Didn't work for me. Now, at this point, it's scary because some people will just keep coming to church and fake it. Other people, they're like, I'm out. I kind of have respect for the ones that say I'm out a little bit more than the fakers, right? But either way, maybe we got some in the room where you just say, I've been in both places where you're just like, I'm out, and I've faked it sometimes. It leads to this. Failure says this. You have a good day, you have a good breakfast, you get up, you said, I could have done much better, I'm going to try it again. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to do it. Temporary success, failure. I could have done better. That is not the Christian life. That could even be related to your quiet time. You got your devotion. You're like, I'm going to do this devotion. 15 minutes a day, I can do that. Temporary success, failure, I could have done better. Even with your time with God, you got to say, God, let's do the second one. Second cycle here. You have a temptation. It could be a sin temptation. It could be a temptation to say, you know what? I can't spend time with God today. I'm going to be tempted. So God, this is a temptation. And the next step is this. I can't do it. I know that it doesn't sound positive, but that's a really good place to start. I can't do it. But then what happens when you say I can't? Grace comes in, God's empowering presence. God gives you grace. God gives you himself, and you know what you experience? Victory. Victory is not something you work for. Victory is something you walk from. Jesus has already given you the victory. He is always waiting to give you his empowering presence. And he will give that to you, and he will allow you to move forward. Temptation, you can't do it. He gives you the ability to run from it, and he gives you grace, and he gives you victory in it. This could actually even be in your time with God. He gives you victory in that moment. And then victory, God gets the glory. You don't get the glory. You didn't do anything. You said you couldn't do it, but God did it. And God gets the glory. You say, God, I've been able to walk through this addiction, and it's really gotten me for like 5 years. I've been dealing with it, but you know what? I started out just spending time with you saying, I can't, sharing it with other people in my small group. And God, you have given me grace, and I've realized that I've always had the victory, and you freed me from it, and I'm moving forward in freedom, God, and I thank you for it, and I'm going to give you glory because I knew I couldn't do it. I've tried it. I've tried the addiction centers. I've tried do it on my own, but God, you have done it. By the way, if you're in that situation right now and you are addicted to something, I encourage you to get as much help as you can get. But know this, a great center, a great help program will always say this: there is a God bigger than you that can take you through this. It's going to take something more than just you doing it. It's going to take God. John 14:21 says this: he who has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I love him and will disclose myself to him. Verse 23 says, Jesus answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. My Father will love him and will come to him. And I love this. I'll make my abode with him. I'll make my home with him. Wow. I want God the Father and Jesus to make their home with me. In the morning, just say, God, I'm your home. Let's just spend time together. And then it says in verse 31 of this passage in John 14, it's not just for my sake. It says this, but so that the world may know that I love the Father, I do exactly as the Father commanded me. I want a watching world to say, wow, that guy loves Jesus. Not that guy obeys. Who cares? That guy loves Jesus. How do you do that? I give God the glory. He's the one that does it in and through me. I believe God's going to do some powerful things over the next week in your life. I really do. Not because you can do it, but because God can. Many of you have missed out on your destiny in life for the last 40 years. It's time to experience what God has always had for you. He wants you to experience his life. But it's not going to come from you and him. It's going to come from him and him alone. Let's pray. We've lost our way. Admit it. But move forward from it. Maybe you've lost your way. It's time to move forward. Maybe you can say this to God right now. I can't. I can't. Maybe you can just say that in your heart right now. I can't. Maybe if you want to say it out loud, go for it. Just say, I can't, God. I can't. I give you my life. I need your presence. For some of you that have never trusted Jesus, maybe today, right now, you could just say, God, I give you my life. I turn from my life and I turn to you. Others of you that have been Christians for a long time, you can just say, God, I can't. But you can. I trust you with my life. I give it to you right now in this moment. Thank you for wanting to spend time with me day in, day out. This week, Lord, by your grace, I'm going to begin to spend time with you, to know you, to love you. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen.